The ancient sword stood in the center of the alien village square, glowing faintly under the twin suns. For generations, it had remained unlifted, a silent challenge to anyone bold enough to try. The alien villagers, tall and slender with skin shimmering like opals, gathered around, whispering in their melodic language about the legend of the Chosen One. From the crowd, the village leader, a regal alien with a crown of bioluminescent tendrils, raised his arms. "Today, one among us may prove their worth and claim the blade." Cheers erupted, but the atmosphere quickly grew tense as one alien after another failed. The sword didn't so much as budge. Jake, a human tourist from Earth, watched the spectacle from the edge of the square, munching on what he could only describe as alien popcorn. He wasn't entirely sure why he was there. His intergalactic travel plans had been an impulsive reaction to a breakup, and he thought this planet might offer some quiet exploration. Instead, he'd found himself in the middle of what looked like an interstellar Renaissance fair. Next to him, Lisha, the village leader's daughter, leaned closer, her large, luminous eyes fixed on him. "Is it true that humans have the strength of 10 warriors?" she asked in a voice that practically purred. Jake blinked. Depends on the human, I guess. I mean, I can carry a few grocery bags in one trip if that counts." Lisha's expression turned dreamy. "Grocery bags? Is that a human courting ritual?" Jake laughed awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "Not exactly." Before he could explain, the village leader gestured toward the crowd. "Is there no one left with the courage to try?" Silence fell. The villagers exchanged nervous glances, unwilling to risk public humiliation. Lisha suddenly grabbed Jake's arm. "You should try." "What?" Jake nearly choked on his popcorn. "You are strong," she insisted. "And you're not afraid of danger. You face the grocery bags of Earth." Jake was about to argue, but the crowd had already noticed their exchange. A murmur rippled through the villagers, and all eyes turned to him. "He is an outsider," someone whispered. "But perhaps that is why he can lift it." The village leader gestured grandly. "Human, step forward. Show us your strength." Jake hesitated, but Lisha was already tugging him toward the sword. "It's just a ceremony," she whispered. "They don't expect you to actually succeed. It's symbolic." Reluctantly, Jake approached the blade. Up close, it looked less like a weapon and more like a really elaborate decorative piece. The hilt was encrusted with glowing crystals, and the blade shimmered as though made of liquid light. "Well, here goes nothing," Jake muttered. He grabbed the hilt with both hands and gave it a casual tug. To his shock, and everyone else's, the sword slid free as though weightless. A brilliant light erupted from the blade, and the crowd gasped in unison. "Chosen mate detected!" The sword boomed in a deep, mechanical voice. Jake froze. "Chosen what now?" The villagers erupted into cheers. Lisha clapped her hands, practically bouncing with excitement. "You did it! You are the one!" "The one what?" Jake asked, still holding the glowing sword. The village leader approached, his expression solemn. "You have proven yourself worthy, human. By ancient law, the one who lifts the sword must marry the village leader's heir." He gestured toward Lisha, who was now looking at Jake with a gaze that could melt steel. Jake blinked, his brain scrambling to catch up. "Wait, hold on. This has to be a mistake. I didn't mean to." The sword interrupted, its voice dripping with sarcasm. "Mistake? Oh no, pal, this is destiny. Congratulations, you're engaged." Jake stared at the blade in horror. "You can talk?" "Yes, and I've been stuck in that rock for a millennium, so trust me, you're my ticket out of here." The crowd began chanting. "Chosen one! Chosen one!" Lisha's father stepped closer, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Prepare yourself, human. The trials begin at dawn." "Trials?" Jake squeaked. "To prove your devotion," the leader explained gravely. "They are not for the faint of heart." Jake looked down at the sword, which was now glowing smugly. "You've got to be kidding me." "Oh no," the sword said. "This is the fun part." The sword's glowing blade hummed faintly in Jake's hand, and no matter how hard he tried to let go, his grip stayed locked. He stared at it, dumbfounded, while the cheering around him intensified. "What is this thing doing?" Jake hissed through gritted teeth. The village leader strode forward, his shimmering robes trailing behind him. "The chosen one has arrived! The bond has been made!" Hold on a second," Jake said, holding the sword at arm's length as though it might explode. "I think there's been a mistake. I didn't sign up for." "There is no mistake," the sword's voice interrupted, sharp and booming. "This human possesses the qualities required for the bond: courage, compassion, and most importantly, desperation." "Hey, what's that supposed to mean?" Jake asked, glaring at the weapon. The sword's glowing edge dimmed slightly, as if it were rolling its non-existent eyes. "You lifted me while thinking of your ex. It's embarrassing, really." The crowd gasped, mistaking Jake's visible discomfort for profound humility. Lisha clasped her hands to her chest, her opalescent skin shimmering pink. "Oh, how selfless! He carries the burden of love lost, yet still dares to bond with the blade of devotion." Jake blinked. "The blade of what now?" The village leader stepped closer, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "It is destiny, human. The blade has chosen you as the mate of my daughter, Lisha. You will complete the 3 trials of devotion to prove your worthiness." "Mate?" Jake sputtered, nearly dropping the sword, which still refused to leave his hand. "No offense, but I didn't sign up for any mating rituals. I'm just here for the snacks and sightseeing." "It is too late," the sword intoned smugly. "The contract is sealed. Also, you're really bad at negotiating." Lisha stepped forward, her luminous eyes brimming with admiration. "Do not fear, Jake of Earth. The trials are but a formality. You have already proven your strength by lifting the blade." "Yeah, I don't think strength had anything to do with it," Jake muttered, eyeing the sword suspiciously. "This thing feels like it weighs about as much as a toaster." Lisha's father raised his arms, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. "The first trial shall commence at dawn. Tonight, let us celebrate this auspicious union." Before Jake could protest, he was whisked away by a group of enthusiastic aliens. They paraded him through the village, showering him with glittering petals that stuck in his hair and clothes. Lisha stayed close to his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "This is all happening way too fast," Jake mumbled, trying to avoid tripping over his own feet. "Can we talk about this in private? Away from the sword and the chanting?" "Your humility is endearing," Lisha said, beaming up at him. "But do not worry, Jake. The blade has chosen wisely. Together, we will be unstoppable." Jake groaned. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. What are these trials? Is there a rule book? A manual?" The sword chuckled darkly. "You'll find out. Spoiler, you're gonna suck at them." Jake rolled his eyes. "Great. Love the pep talk, Excalibur." Lisha leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Do not let its words unsettle you. The sword has always been difficult." "Understatement of the year," Jake muttered, glaring at the glowing blade. By the time they reached the village center again, Jake's patience was wearing thin. As the aliens continued to celebrate, he tried one last time to pry the sword from his hand, only for it to tighten its grip. "Stop struggling," the sword chided. "It's embarrassing for both of us." Jake sighed in defeat, slumping against a nearby pillar. Lisha joined him, her radiant smile softening. "I know this must be overwhelming for you, but I promise I will help you succeed in the trials. Together, we will honor the bond." He glanced at her, noticing for the first time how her shimmering skin caught the light. She was beautiful, in an otherworldly way, but the weight of the situation pressed down on him harder than the sword's unyielding grip. "Look, I appreciate the enthusiasm," he said carefully. "But back on Earth, we kind of take our time with relationships. There's dating, awkward small talk, maybe a few bad movie choices. This whole destined mate thing is a little intense." Lisha tilted her head, her tendrils glowing faintly. "Dating? Is that like a preliminary trial?" Jake laughed despite himself. Something like that. But let's just say I wasn't expecting my next relationship to involve glowing swords and public ceremonies. The sword's voice cut in, smug as ever. You're welcome. The celebration carried on into the night, with Jake seated awkwardly at the center of a grand feast. The villagers surrounded him, toasting with goblets of what looked like glowing green sludge. Lisha sat beside him, her gaze fixed adoringly on his face, while the sword rested across his lap, humming faintly like a smug cat. Jake leaned toward Lisha. So, about these trials, they're not, life-threatening, are they? Oh no, Lisha replied, her voice dripping with sincerity. They are merely meant to demonstrate your devotion. The first trial, for example, involves crafting a ballad of love and loyalty. Jake's stomach sank. A ballad? As in a song? Yes. Lisha's eyes lit up. Music is the language of the soul, and your performance will prove the depth of your feelings for me. The sword snickered, its glowing edge flickering. Don't worry, champ. Maybe your OFF warbling will scare off the competition. Jake glared at the blade. A lot of help you are. I am a weapon, not a vocal coach. The sword replied, sounding entirely too pleased with itself. The next morning, Jake found himself standing in the village amphitheater, surrounded by an expectant crowd. A small group of alien musicians waited nearby, their instruments resembling oversized seashells. Lisha watched from the front row, her hands clasped in anticipation. Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. All right, I guess I'll give this a shot. But don't say I didn't warn you, I'm no singer. He stepped forward, cleared his throat, and began to belt out a shaky rendition of the only thing that came to mind, a reworked version of Can't Help Falling in Love. The lyrics were clumsy, and his voice cracked on the high notes, but the crowd listened in stunned silence. When he finished, there was a beat of stillness before the amphitheater erupted in applause. Lisha's skin flushed a vibrant pink, a clear sign of her delight. That was beautiful, she cried, her voice trembling with emotion. Jake stared at her, baffled. You're kidding, right? The sword chimed in, sounding genuinely impressed for once. I'll be damned. You managed to win them over with that train wreck. Maybe you're not completely hopeless. Before Jake could respond, the village leader stepped onto the stage. The chosen one has passed the first trial, he announced. Tomorrow, he will face the trial of the beast. Jake froze. Beast? What beast? Lisha smiled reassuringly. Do not worry, Jake. The beast is a sacred guardian. You must simply show it that you are not a threat. That doesn't sound too bad, Jake said, trying to convince himself. The sword chuckled darkly. You're gonna love this. Trust me. Jake groaned. Why do I feel like I'm being set up? The next morning, Jake stood in the village's outer ring, surrounded by dense jungle. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of alien creatures echoed in the distance. Lisha stood beside him, looking both serene and anxious. Don't worry, Jake, she said softly. The beast is just a test of your courage. All you have to do is prove you are worthy of me. Jake shot her a nervous glance. Right, just show I'm worthy of you by, what? Not getting eaten? Lisha smiled, but it was more of a sympathetic expression. It won't eat you. I'm certain of it. Yeah, sure, certain, Jake muttered. Just like I was certain I'd be sitting on a beach drinking a cold one when I woke up this morning. The sword, still lodged firmly in his hand, responded gleefully. Oh, this is going to be good. Maybe you'll impress them by punching a giant space lizard in the face. Jake shot a glare at the sword. You're really not helping, you know that? The sword hummed innocently. I'm just here for the entertainment. Lisha motioned toward the dense trees ahead. This is where it begins. You must walk into the jungle and face the beast when it comes. Do not show fear. It senses your fear. Jake sighed. And I'm supposed to do that by standing here like a target? Exactly, Lisha said, her eyes gleaming. Just stand your ground. Show your bravery. Before Jake could respond, a low growl echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down his spine. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and an enormous shadow loomed over them. Jake's heart rate picked up as something large and dark emerged from the brush. He could barely make it out through the jungle's thick foliage, but it was clear that whatever this thing was, it was massive. A sleek, scaled creature with glowing red eyes stalked out of the trees, its body towering over Jake. Its teeth were sharp enough to puncture metal, and its claws glistened with venomous droplets. Jake swallowed hard. Okay, no need to panic, Jake whispered to himself, though it sounded more like a desperate prayer. Do not run, the sword advised loudly. Or you're dead. Trust me, I've seen this. Jake forced himself to stand tall, his knees shaking. Right. No running. He looked at Lisha. How do I, prove I'm not a threat? Lisha's smile didn't falter. Just stay calm. The beast respects strength and bravery. If you show fear, it will attack. I'm showing more fear than a house hat on the 4th of July, but okay, Jake said, his voice strained. No fear. I got this. The beast let out another rumbling growl and took a step forward. Jake could feel the ground vibrating beneath him. His mind raced as he stared into the glowing eyes of the creature, and for a moment, he considered bolting. But the sword, as if sensing his hesitation, buzzed in his hand. You don't get to run, buddy. That's not how this game works, the sword quipped. With a nervous laugh, Jake backed away slowly. Okay. Don't panic. Stay cool. I can do this. He raised his hands in front of him, trying to appear more confident than he felt. The creature sniffed the air, its eyes narrowing as it sized him up. Jake's thoughts were spinning, but he knew he had to stay calm. He couldn't afford to show weakness. Come on, you can do this, Jake whispered to himself. You've faced worse than this. Then, without warning, the beast lunged. It happened so fast that Jake had no time to react. His body was paralyzed with fear, and the beast's massive jaws snapped just inches from his face. But then something strange happened. Instead of running or freezing up, Jake instinctively swung the sword in front of him, as if trying to defend himself. What are you doing? The sword screeched. You're going to. But Jake, fueled by panic and instinct, made a wild swipe with the sword. To his shock, the blade flashed and emitted a burst of light. The beast recoiled, screeching in pain as it staggered back. Lisha gasped. It worked! Jake stared at the sword in disbelief. What the hell was that? The sword's voice was smug. I didn't know you had it in you, champ. I guess all that blind panic paid off. The beast, now visibly startled, backed away further, its red eyes still locked on Jake. It growled, but didn't approach again. Just stay still, Jake panted. I'm not trying to fight you. I don't even know what's going on right now. The beast hesitated, its body twitching as though contemplating its next move. For a long, tense moment, it stood there, staring at Jake. Then, with one last growl, it turned and disappeared into the jungle. Jake exhaled in relief, his knees buckling slightly as the adrenaline wore off. I can't believe that worked. I didn't even know what I was doing. Lisha ran to his side, her face glowing with admiration. Jake, you were amazing. You stood your ground. You're truly worthy. Jake grinned weakly, still catching his breath. Yeah, I guess that's one way to do it. The sword, however, wasn't impressed. You got lucky. Don't get too cocky, pal. The next trial is gonna be way harder. Jake rolled his eyes. Of course it is. Jake stood in the aftermath of the beast's retreat, still gripping the sword, his heart pounding in his chest. The jungle was eerily quiet now, the distant sounds of alien wildlife replaced by the steady rhythm of his breath. Lisha slowly approached him, her eyes wide with admiration. That was incredible, Jake, she said, her voice filled with awe. You've passed the trial of the beast. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and let out a nervous chuckle. Yeah, sure. If by passed you mean barely avoided being eaten, then I guess I did it. The sword hummed softly in his hand. I wouldn't say you barely passed. You barely survived, but you passed. Lisha's face softened. You don't give yourself enough credit. You showed courage. That's what matters here. Jake's mind was still reeling from the encounter. He hadn't expected that kind of attack, or that the sword would help. So, what's next? Another trial? Some more dangerous alien animals? No, Lisha said, shaking her head. Now you face the trial of the dance. Jake blinked. The what? The trial of the dance, she repeated, her tone serious. It is a sacred test of coordination and harmony. If you can dance well, it proves that you are worthy of being my mate. Jake stared at her, dumbfounded. Wait, you're serious? A dance? Yes, Lisha said, nodding eagerly. A beautiful dance. And it will show the village that you are capable of expressing your love in the most graceful way possible. Jake was speechless for a moment. You're really not kidding about this, are you? The sword, always ready with a quip, chimed in. Hey, you know what they say. Dance like nobody's watching, except all the aliens who'll be watching. No pressure. Jake groaned. I am not a dancer. I don't even know what the hell I'm supposed to be doing. Lisha, unfazed, took his hand gently. Do not worry. I will teach you. We will practice together, and you will do fine. They walked toward a flat stone platform in the center of the village, surrounded by eager spectators. The music began to play, a strange, melodic tune that sounded both alien and familiar. Lisha began to sway, her movements fluid and graceful. Jake watched in disbelief as she twirled and spun effortlessly, her body moving in time with the rhythm. She glanced over her shoulder and saw his stiff, awkward posture. You must loosen up, Jake. It is not about perfection, it is about feeling the music. Jake tried to mimic her movements, but his limbs felt like they were made of stone. He stumbled through the steps, his feet constantly tripping over themselves. This is ridiculous. I look like I'm having a seizure. Not true, the sword interjected. You look like a fish out of water, but a very determined fish. Lisha smiled, but there was a glimmer of concern in her eyes. It's okay. You just need to feel the rhythm. I can barely feel my legs, let alone the rhythm. Jake muttered, his face flushing in frustration. But despite his protestations, Lisha was patient with him. She guided his movements gently, showing him how to move with the music, how to hold her close without tripping over his feet. With every step, he grew more comfortable, and the awkwardness slowly melted away. After what felt like hours, Jake finally managed to hold himself steady as they danced together. His steps were still clumsy, but they had a certain rhythm to them. The crowd around them cheered, clapping in time with the beat. Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment, even if he wasn't exactly perfect. I can't believe I'm actually dancing, he muttered to himself. You're doing great, the sword cheered. Just a little more, and you'll be the star of the show. Lisha looked up at him with a bright smile. See? I knew you could do it. Jake managed a half smile in return. Yeah, well, I guess if the whole heroic warrior thing doesn't work out, I've got a future in the dance business. The music reached its crescendo, and the crowd's excitement grew louder. Jake spun Lisha with more confidence this time, his movements becoming smoother. They twirled together, their bodies in sync, and for a moment, everything felt right. Then, just as they were nearing the end of the dance, Jake felt a jolt of panic. The sword's voice suddenly echoed in his mind. You're doing great, but there's one last thing you need to know. What? Jake asked, barely able to keep his focus on Lisha as he twirled her. You're about to face the final test, the sword declared ominously. Before Jake could react, the music abruptly cut off, and a booming voice came from the crowd. The dance is over, the voice said. Now comes the final test, the trial of the kiss. Jake froze, his heart racing. The what? Lisha smiled at him, her eyes sparkling. It is the ultimate test. If you pass this trial, you will prove your love to the entire village. If you fail, well, we won't talk about that. Jake felt his stomach flip. He glanced at the sword, which was gleaming with an almost mischievous glow. "Good luck, hero," the sword taunted. "You're going to need it." Lisha leaned closer, her lips inches from his. Jake, still reeling from the suddenness of it all, could barely think straight. But as their faces drew closer, the tension between them became palpable. He had no choice now. He could either do this, or risk failing the final test. He closed his eyes, leaned in, and kissed her. It was awkward at first, his lips a bit too stiff, but as Lisha responded, her kiss warm and inviting, Jake relaxed. The crowd cheered in the background, and for the first time in a long while, Jake felt like maybe, just maybe, he might actually belong here. Jake stared at the crowd, a mixture of disbelief and terror flooding through him. The trial of the kiss? This wasn't part of the plan. He had barely survived the beast, and made a fool of himself during the dance. Now, he was expected to kiss Lisha, in front of everyone, as the final test of his worthiness? He turned to her, his face flushed with anxiety. I don't think I'm ready for this trial." Lisha, blissfully unaware of Jake's panic, gave him an encouraging smile. "It is simple. The kiss will seal your victory. It is a sign that you have accepted me as your mate, and I have accepted you." Jake swallowed, his throat dry. "Right, I mean, I'm not exactly a kissing expert, especially not in front of an entire alien village." "Do not worry, Jake," the sword chimed in. "You've come this far, and you've made it through worse. Now all you have to do is pucker up." Jake groaned inwardly, barely able to concentrate with the sword's obnoxious commentary in his ear. The whole village was watching, waiting in anticipation, and he was expected to pull off a perfect kiss like some kind of romance movie hero. He was no hero. He was just a guy who got dragged into a ridiculous intergalactic mess because of a misunderstanding about mating rituals. "Do not be nervous," Lisha said, her voice soothing. "It is not a contest. It is simply a kiss." Jake tried to steady his breath, but it didn't help. He glanced down at the ground, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "Simple, she says," he muttered under his breath. The sword, of course, didn't let the opportunity pass. "Simple, he says. I'd be more worried about the fact that you're kissing someone who may or may not have alien bugs in her mouth." Lisha looked confused, but Jake shook his head quickly, trying to cover up his embarrassment. "Forget the sword. It's been annoying me all day." "Annoying? I've been the voice of reason here," the sword retorted indignantly. Jake looked at Lisha again, seeing the trust and affection in her eyes. Despite everything, there was a small part of him that didn't want to disappoint her. He didn't know what the hell was going on half the time, but one thing was clear: this was the woman he had unintentionally won over, and somehow, he had to prove he was worth the crazy title of chosen mate. All right, Jake said, mentally preparing himself. "Let's get this over with." He leaned in toward Lisha, trying his best to ignore the millions of eyes on him. The pressure was unreal, but he'd done worse things in his life, right? He could handle this. Just as their lips were about to meet, a loud voice interrupted the moment. "Wait!" someone shouted from the crowd. Jake froze, his lips hovering just above Lisha's. "What now?" he groaned. A tall, muscular alien with 3 eyes stepped forward, looking directly at Lisha. "I challenge the human," the alien declared. "I challenge him for her hand in marriage." Lisha's face darkened, her expression serious. "You know the rules, Zorith. The trial is over. The kiss is the final test. Jake is the chosen mate." The alien, Zorith, sneered. "Not if I have anything to say about it. I am the greatest warrior here. No human can be worthy of our people." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, the sword interrupted with a sudden, dramatic flourish. "Oh, this is going to be good. Are you ready to show this guy who's boss?" "No, I'm not ready," Jake hissed through gritted teeth. Lisha stepped between them, her eyes flashing with determination. "Jake is worthy. The sword has chosen him, and that is the will of the village." Zorith growled, clearly displeased. "Then let the village decide. I challenge him in combat." Jake's stomach sank. Combat? With this alien warrior? No way. He didn't even know how to hold a sword properly, let alone fight a giant alien. But there was no way out. He couldn't back down in front of the entire village. If he did, he might as well pack up and leave right then and there. Great combat, Jake muttered sarcastically. I'm sure this will go well. The sword, always ready to offer its wisdom, spoke up once more. Combat? Well, you're about to get a crash course in the art of kicking alien butt. Prepare yourself. Jake couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I don't even know where to start with that. Lisha turned to him, her voice firm. You don't have to fight like a warrior, Jake. Just be yourself. Show him that you have the strength to fight for what you believe in. Jake raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Not getting killed? Exactly, she said with a nod. But more than that. Fight for me. Fight for us. Jake's nerves were on overdrive, but Lisha's words gave him a strange sense of resolve. It was more than just a kiss, more than just the trials. It was about proving to himself, and to Lisha, that he could stand up to whatever came his way. All right, here goes nothing, Jake muttered, turning to face Soreth. The alien warrior grinned, cracking his knuckles. I'll make this quick, human, Soreth taunted, his 3 eyes narrowing in disdain. Jake took a deep breath. Bring it on. As the two squared off, the crowd fell silent, the tension hanging in the air. For Jake, it was no longer about proving himself to aliens or winning the trials. It was about standing up for what he wanted, for what he had found in Lisha, and maybe, just maybe, surviving long enough to kiss her.